A 300-pound man, chasing viral fame, hurled a greasy burger at a Tomb Sentinel's pristine uniform. He expected laughs. What he got was a lesson in respect from a combat veteran, and it wasn't pretty. The April sun cast a crisp, unforgiving light across the sprawling plaza of the National Sentinel Monument. It was a place built from silence and marble, where rows of stark white headstones marched over the rolling green hills in perfect, silent formation. The air itself felt heavy, weighted with the gravity of sacrifice. At the heart of this solemn expanse stood the altar of the Nameless, a monolithic block of polished black granite that seemed to absorb the very light around it. And before it, a lone figure stood guard. Sergeant Kalen Kale. Vance was 30 years old, though the stillness he'd mastered made him seem ageless. He stood planted on the ceremonial mat, a statue carved from discipline. His ceremonial tunic was a blinding white, accented with gold braid and a single, crimson sash. Polished metals, each a story of a place far from this peaceful hill, were arrayed on his chest in a silent, gleaming testament. In his gloved hands, he held a ceremonial AK series rifle, its wood grain polished to a dark sheen, its metalwork gleaming. It was not a prop. Nothing here was. Kale's gaze was fixed on a point somewhere beyond the horizon, his face a mask of resolute duty. This sacred quiet was shattered by a booming, obnoxious laugh that echoed across the stones. Would you look at this guy, Tiff? He's like a life-size G.I. Joe. Barry Baz Jenkins lumbered into view, a mountain of a man tipping the scales at nearly 300 pounds. His massive frame was squeezed into a faded t-shirt that proclaimed him the Grill King over a cartoon pig in sunglasses. He wielded a selfie stick like a scepter, a phone fixed to its end, capturing his every moronic utterance. Trailing in his wake was his girlfriend, Tiffany, a girl whose perpetual giggles served as the soundtrack to Baz's buffoonery. "Oh my God, Baz, you're so bad," she shrieked, covering her mouth in a parody of shock as he stepped right up to the velvet rope line demarcating the sacred space. Most visitors spoke in hushed whispers. They kept a respectful distance. Not Baz. He was a creature of noise and consumption, and he treated the monument like an amusement park that had foolishly forgotten to install a roller coaster. "All right, folks, welcome back to the Baz Nation," he bellowed into his phone. "We're here at the, big shiny rock place, and we found the world's most boring superhero. Captain America's less fun cousin, Captain Still As Aboard." Tiffany howled with laughter. A few teenagers nearby cracked nervous smiles, but a palpable tension began to spread through the crowd. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer. An elderly man in a wheelchair, a VFW cap resting on his lap, simply shook his head, a look of profound disappointment clouding his features. Kale's expression didn't flicker. His breathing remained a slow, measured cadence. He was trained for this. Distractions were part of the terrain. Hecklers, crying babies, sudden downpours. They were all just weather. His duty was to the altar, to the souls it represented. But Baz was just warming up. "Okay, Tiff, get this," he said, handing her the selfie stick. He then turned his attention to Kale's solemn patrol. As the guard executed a flawless 21-step march, his steel-toed boots striking the granite with a thunderous report, Baz began to mimic him. He lifted his fleshy knees high, stomping his oversized sneakers on the pavement in a grotesque parody. He puffed out his chest and swung his arms wildly, his face contorted in a mocking grimace. The sacred rhythm was desecrated by his oafish thuds, turning a ceremony of honor into a clownish spectacle. The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived. The initial ripples of laughter from the teenagers emboldened Baz. He was an addict, and attention was his drug. He strutted back to the rope line, grabbing the selfie stick from Tiffany. "See that, Baz Nation? Nailed it," he declared, panting slightly from the exertion. "Now for close-up on our Boy Scout here." He pushed the phone on its stick over the velvet rope, bringing the lens uncomfortably close to Kale's face. "Let's get a good look. Man, they must paint that expression on in the morning. And that rifle. Hollywood makes better props than that piece of plastic. Pew, pew, pew." He made childish gun noises, his voice echoing in the otherwise silent plaza. Standing near the edge of the crowd was a man in his late 60s. He stood ramrod straight, his posture a stark contrast to Baz's slovenly slump. On the lapel of his blazer was a small, unassuming pin, a symbol of service in Desert Storm. This was retired Marine Colonel Hayes, and his pale blue eyes, which had witnessed true conflict, now hardened into chips of ice. He watched Baz not with anger, but with a cold, analytical fury. A young mother, sensing the escalating ugliness, took her son's hand. "Come on, sweetie," she whispered. "Let's go look at the reflecting pool." She cast a look of pure disgust at Baz as she guided her child away from the toxic scene. The disturbance had not gone unnoticed. Ranger Miller, a man with a weathered face and an air of quiet authority, began making his way through the crowd. His stride was purposeful, his eyes locked on the large man, making a mockery of the monument's core tenet. Inside the fortress of his discipline, Cale felt the intrusion. He remained a statue of white and gold, but his mind was a storm. A voice, gravelly and sharp, echoed in his memory, the voice of his Sentinel drill sergeant. "You are a ghost. You are marble. You feel nothing because you are nothing. You exist only to guard the memory of true heroes." The voice was a shield, but another memory pushed through, unbidden. The memory of a dusty street in Kandahar, the son a merciless hammer. The weight of his real rifle, heavy and hot in his hands. The faces of his brothers, young men who would never grow old, who now lay under stones just like the ones dotting the hills around him. His jaw muscle bunched, a single, tiny betrayal of the turmoil within. He focused his gaze on the inscription carved into the altar, "Eternal rest grant unto them, and let perpetual light shine upon them." It was his anchor. It was his purpose. "Sir," Ranger Miller's voice was calm, but held an undeniable edge of command. He was standing beside Baz now. "Sir, I need you to step back from the line. This is a restricted area, and I must ask you to show respect for the Sentinel on duty." Baz turned, a smirk playing on his lips. He saw the Ranger's intervention not as a reprimand, but as a thrilling escalation for his audience. "Whoa, official business," he announced to his phone. The fun police showed up. "No worries, officer. Just admiring the, statue." "He is not a statue," Miller said, his voice dropping a degree colder. "He is a decorated combat soldier of the United States Armed Forces. And this is sacred ground. This is your only warning." The Ranger's warning was gasoline on the fire of Baz's ego. He stepped back from the rope, but it was a theatrical retreat, full of mock surrender. He held his hands up, grinning at his phone. "You hear that, Baz Nation? We almost got arrested for patriotism," he lied with a chuckle. "Man, this place is intense. Guess we gotta take it to the next level." He winked at Tiffany, who had her phone out again, recording from a different angle. Colonel Hayes took a half step forward, his body language screaming intervention. He recognized the look in Baz's eyes, the vacant, thrill-seeking narcissism of someone who understood nothing of consequence. He opened his mouth to speak, to unleash a lifetime of command authority on this pathetic man-child, but it was too late. "Watch this, Tiff," Baz said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "This is the content that breaks the internet." He reached into a crumpled, grease-stained paper bag from a fast food chain. The crowd watched, a morbid curiosity mixing with a growing sense of dread. What emerged from the bag was a large double cheeseburger, obscenely loaded with toppings. Globs of red ketchup and bright yellow mustard oozed from the sides, dripping onto Baz's sausage-like fingers. He held it up to his phone's camera like a holy relic. "Time for the ultimate prank," he declared. "We're gonna feed the tin soldier." Operation Burger Bomb is a go. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. This was no longer a foolish prank. It was a deliberate act of desecration. "Son, don't you dare," Colonel Hayes growled, his voice low and dangerous. A woman near him audibly prayed, "Oh Lord, no." Baz was beyond hearing. He was lost in his own world of imagined viral glory. With a theatrical wind-up that mimicked a baseball pitcher, he locked his eyes on Cale's chest. For a split second, The world seemed to hold its breath. The sun glinted off Kale's medals. The white tunic was a perfect, immaculate canvas. "Bombs away!" Baz roared. He lobbed the burger. It sailed through the air in a lazy, greasy arc, a grotesque missile of disrespect. Time seemed to slow down. Kale didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He stood his ground, the guardian at the gate. The burger struck. It hit him square in the chest with a wet, sickening smack. An explosion of red, yellow, and brown splattered across the pristine white fabric. A large chunk of greasy meat and bun slid down the front of his tunic, leaving a viscous trail, before falling to the granite with a soft thud. Ketchup, like fake blood, soaked into the material. A dollop of mustard clung obscenely to the edge of a purple heart medal. Absolute, profound silence fell over the plaza. The only sound was the gentle breeze, which now seemed to carry a collective sense of shame. For 3 seconds that stretched into an eternity, Kale remained utterly motionless. He was a monument desecrated, the grotesque stain on his uniform a shocking violation against the marble and granite backdrop. The crowd was frozen, a tableau of horrified faces. Tiffany's hand was clapped over her mouth, her giggling finally silenced. Baz's triumphant grin began to falter, melting into a confused uncertainty as the wave of silent condemnation washed over him. He had expected outrage, maybe a shout. He had not anticipated this vast, empty, suffocating silence. Then a sound. Clack. It was sharp, precise, and brutally loud. It was the sound of Kale's ceremonial rifle being shifted from parade rest to shoulder arms in a single, flawless motion. The movement was a blur of white gloves and polished wood, executed with a speed and ferocity that was utterly terrifying. The silence was broken again, this time by the thunderous report of Kale's steel-toed boots striking the granite. Crack, crack, crack. He did not run. He did not charge. He marched. Each step was a perfectly measured, earth-shaking impact, a seismic expression of contained fury. He marched off the ceremonial mat, across the polished stone, directly toward the velvet rope separating him from the jeering tourist. He moved with the unstoppable, terrifying purpose of an avalanche. He reached the rope line. He did not bother to unclip the brass hook. In one fluid, powerful motion, his left hand, clad in its immaculate white glove, shot out and clamped down on Baz's thick wrist. The grip was like a hydraulic press. Baz let out a high-pitched yelp of shock and pain, the selfie stick clattering to the ground. For the first time in over 4 hours, Sergeant Kalen Vance spoke. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a low, resonant baritone, perfectly controlled, yet it carried the weight of a battle tank and cut through the plaza silence like a diamond blade. "This is not," he said, pausing to let the words sink in, "an amusement park." His eyes, a pale, piercing blue that had been hidden in the shadow of his service cap, locked onto Baz's. They were devoid of heat, filled instead with a cold, clear fire that spoke of discipline forged in hellish places. The last vestiges of Baz's bravado evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal fear. He was no longer looking at a statue. He was looking a soldier. Kale leaned in, his voice dropping even lower, a serrated whisper meant only for Baz but felt by everyone. "You did not disrespect me. You disrespected every soul buried on this hallowed ground. You dishonored the flag they died for. And you did it for a video." Baz's face had gone from pink to a pasty, chalk white. His lips trembled. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic squeak emerged. In that moment, the 300-pound grill king was utterly, completely broken. The confrontation had lasted only seconds, but it had irrevocably altered the atmosphere of the plaza. Ranger Miller and 2 other Rangers were there in an instant, their professionalism a stark contrast to Baz's chaotic energy. "Sergeant, stand down. We have him," Miller commanded, his voice sharp and tense. Kale held his iron grip on Baz's wrist for one more beat, a silent, final transmission of the gravity of the offense. He then released him with a slight, contemptuous push. Baz stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet and landing heavily on the ground with a loud grunt. The fall was as undignified as his actions. Before the Rangers could haul Baz to his feet, Colonel Hayes stepped forward. He moved past Miller, planting himself in front of the whimpering man on the ground. The colonel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were precise, each one a perfectly aimed shot. "Get up," he said. It wasn't a request. Baz scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with fear. "I served 30 years in the United States Marine Corps," the colonel continued, his voice dripping with a lifetime of authority and contempt. "I've seen brave men die in deserts of sand and mud. Every blade of grass on this hill, every polished stone, was paid for with their blood, the blood of men 1,000 times better than you will ever be. You desecrated their memory with a cheeseburger. You are a national disgrace." Miller and the other Rangers pulled Baz's arms behind his back, the sharp click of handcuffs echoing in the silence. Tiffany was openly sobbing now, her phone clutched in her hand like the worthless trinket it was. "This isn't a simple fine for littering, son," Miller explained, his voice grim as he read Baz's rights. "This is destruction of federal property, disorderly conduct on sacred grounds, and interfering with a sentinel of the tomb. You are in a world of serious trouble." As they began to lead the cuffed man away, a final, desperate plea burst from Baz. He looked over his shoulder at Cale, who had already pivoted and was marching back to his post, his back a rigid wall of defiance against the ugly stain on his uniform. "I'm sorry, man. I'm so sorry. It was just a joke. I didn't mean anything by it," he wailed, his voice cracking. Cale stopped on the edge of the ceremonial mat. He did not turn around. His voice, clear and steady, carried across the plaza one last time, a final judgment delivered with chilling finality. "Your apology is owed to the dead," he said, "and they can no longer hear it." The words struck Baz with the force of a physical blow. His shoulders slumped in utter defeat, and he was led away, a broken, pathetic monument to his own stupidity. With Baz's pathetic exit, a new kind of silence settled over the National Sentinel Monument. It was no longer just quiet, it was profound. The tourists who remained looked at Cale with a completely new understanding. They no longer saw a stoic figure in a pristine uniform, a symbol of an abstract idea. They saw a man, a guardian, who had stood his ground, bearing the stain of a fool's disrespect with unwavering dignity. Their gazes were filled with a mixture of awe, sympathy, and a deep, burgeoning respect. The ugly, greasy splotch on Cale's white tunic was no longer just a stain. It had become a medal of a different sort, a testament to his incredible restraint and the silent battle he had won. When the time came for the changing of the guard, the ceremony took on a heightened significance. Another sentinel, just as immaculate and resolute as Cale had been, marched out to relieve him. They performed the intricate, flawless ritual, their movements a powerful, unspoken rebuke to the day's chaos. As Cale marched off duty, his head held high, the crowd didn't just watch. They offered a quiet, respectful applause, a spontaneous tribute to the honor he had upheld. In the hours and days that followed, the incident exploded online. But it wasn't Baz's video that went viral. His channel was inundated with a tidal wave of outrage and contempt, vanishing under a deluge of dislikes and furious comments. The footage that captured the nation's attention came from the phones of dozens of other onlookers. Videos that showed not a prank, but an act of profound disrespect followed by a moment of quiet, powerful justice. The story sparked a national conversation, a digital campfire around which people debated what honor, sacrifice, and respect truly mean in an age of fleeting fame and shallow spectacle. The greasy burger on a white uniform became a symbol, a stark reminder of the line between humor and sacrilege. The final shot of the most-watched video was not of the confrontation, but a slow pan across the endless, silent rows of white headstones standing guard over the nation's fallen. They held their ground, just as Sergeant Vance had, unmoved and eternal. What does true respect mean to you? Share your thoughts, but please, always comment with respect for the fallen. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what honor truly costs.